Hello, my friends. This is Lada from AstroladaOfficial, and I'm so excited to have this financial astrological wizard, Sama, speaker of truth, who serves it without any, without very directly, basically. Whenever you give us information, I'm so excited to have you back. Sama, what are we in for? What's happening in the world, and especially financially? What is the world to expect?
Well, hello. I'm just following in your footsteps. You are very honest and forthcoming, so it's easy for me to come on here and just follow that wave and that vibe. So,
With the
I truly
conspiracy
hope you're
channel,
well.
with the conspiracy astrologers, that's what we've been branded. So, but I'm glad.
Yep, we've been branded. Everyone knows.
I'm glad for
The
moving.
algorithms know anyway.
Yes, they haven't.
Yeah, that's for sure.
But I'm so glad the space still we're allowed to do it, to have it here, to serve it as it is. So
Absolutely.
I'm honored to hear what you have to share with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I truly hope you're well. If you're watching, we can see how certain predictions related to social unrest have evolved and continue to evolve. As usual, before we even get started today and exploring, as I'm sharing all the ways this information will benefit you guys, it's important that it happens in a way that it feels right, it makes sense, and it's right for you guys. So you guys are going to be using this for all your own reasons, your own different life situations, wherever you are in the world. This is going to apply to you in many different ways, right? So feel free to stop, comment below, ask questions. Even you, Lada, feel free to stop at any point. That helps support that. And for any of you guys watching, okay? So the last time we were on, I said that the summer would be good, positive, bullish for markets, and that the markets would likely be heading down into the eclipse season in October, November. That was one of the predictions, right? I said the dollar would get stronger over time until the summer of next year, right? So we haven't quite seen that yet, but it's picking up, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Remember, we said that the banking crisis is just in the beginning phases. That was another prediction. And we looked at several charts with Virgo, Uranus activations, and Mercury involved, right? Because I said that we were at risk of nuclear war activations this fall. People didn't like that. I didn't even like the video or making the predictions, but charts are charts, right? And I said that inflation would come back and that you all should go shopping, which some people thought was ridiculous. I joked about it like Sagittarius often do, but I'm going to be a little bit more serious this time around because, what people were seeing at that time too, when I made that prediction, especially in America, we look at the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. That's the metric that the United States government gives us to look at for inflation. That was actually falling when I made that prediction. So even on my own channel, there were people in the comments like, what is this guy talking about? Hasama lost it. He used to be really like, what's going on here? Kind of a thing, But of course, at this point in time, I think all those predictions are valid. We've seen how all those have played out, and I think they're still relevant because some of these predictions, like war and banking and the dollar, they're still playing themselves out. We still need to watch these things. Now, as far as inflation, the bottom line is, I know sometimes I say shocking statements on here, but in terms of inflation, the inflation we saw in 2023 is going to be the lowest that we'll see for the remainder of this decade, period.
Well,
So
it's going to be going.
yeah.
What is that based on? Astrology.
So when the planet Neptune moves into the sign of Aries, we will see how destructive inflation can really be, right? What we've lived through so far is a taste, right? So again, a reminder, buy the things you guys need, do it this year. At this point now, people are out of money, they're running out of money, but this is what short-sighted people need to understand because they probably don't know this, right? In the 70s, for example, America experienced, let's say, so this time period we're living through now, it's very similar to the 40s because Uranus and Taurus was active at that time. And there's also similarities to the 70s as well. In the 70s, America experienced the first wave of inflation. and treasuries, US debt, government debt, it actually did okay. Then inflation calmed down like it did in 2023. And people started to get a little complacent, right? Like if I was alive back then and we had YouTube back then, people would be saying, we handled inflation, but that's not actually what happened. It actually comes in waves. There was a second wave of inflation that came in, and that's when US debt really, really suffered, and people kind of got kicked in the teeth by that. And so we're probably going to see history repeat itself. And what's going to drive that is obviously the war conflict as well, right? So what else have we seen? We've seen within a week of the South Node lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Libra, South Node representing releasing, letting go, Libra presenting partnerships, right? What have we seen? We've seen war break out between Hamas and Israel, right? And here's the most important part of that. This is from insider information. Tehran will likely back Hamas, which will bring in another nuclear power. America is going to double down.
Sorry, did you say Iran? Okay, yeah.
Tehran, yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So what's America going to do? Double down on Israel, right? And this is where that allies with the nodes on this axis of Aries and Libra get challenged, right? These allies are going to shift. They're going to get tested. Allies are going to break apart. There's going to be new alliances. Last time I was on, we talked about the EU chart, right? And all those countries within. I'll touch on that a little bit later. But as we have more eclipses in that axis, we will see new alliances forming and breaking. And so this is the secret. If there's conflict in the Middle East, what does that do to the oil price? Okay. Price of oil goes up. Trouble is, to make matters worse, since oil is how everything gets transported to us in this world with UPS and Amazon boxes and you name it, right? Everything gets transported by oil, everything. So that means the price of food goes up, the price of energy goes up, the price of heating, as we go into the winter again, it goes up. The price of everything goes up. So there's your inflation, is the eclipses as they trigger this axis and there's more conflict in the Middle East where these oil producing countries are, it makes life expensive. Oil is also priced in dollars. So now everyone's going to need more dollars, right? And so, truthfully, look, people can look at the CPI numbers, the government gives them all they want to. As long as the United States and Europe is pouring endless dollars into Ukraine and getting into new wars while this axis is triggered, inflation is a problem and it's here to stay, right? Because there is this dichotomy between, we hear the Federal Reserve trying to raise rates and do all the things they're doing. That's just one branch of the American government. The rest of the American government is spending, baby. They're spending. And that interaction between one branch of government, the Federal Reserve, trying to contain inflation, and the rest of them that don't understand finances at all, spending like crazy, we'll see which one of those two will win, right? And so what's left, right? Like the statistics are showing, Americans in particular, their bank accounts, their savings are kind of out at this point, going from September into October, right? Student loan payments, same thing, right? So people will have to pull money out of markets to pay for everyday things, right? Now, here's where it gets nuanced. See, the trick is, I don't think it's the stock market that will break, because the stock market that's only half the story, right? I kind of hinted at it, right? We have this dichotomy between one part of the American government that's trying to contain inflation and the other that thinks we have more money than God and wants to get into all these conflicts across the world, kind of like the Roman Empire did, all over the world, war here, war there, right? So we have to talk about Jupiter. Jupiter, the gas giant, the planet of expansion, is in the sign of currencies, Taurus, and it's in the house of debts, the sixth house for the United States chart itself. So the biggest risk, in my eyes, as we talked about with, the Signature, Silicon Valley Bank in April and all those other banks, the last time I was on, right? We talked about that big risk is going to be actually the banking system and the treasury market, the bond market, US debt, sovereign debt, the debt of all governments. That's where the crisis is hiding. Okay. So European debt, Chinese debt, the debt of all of these governments, right? A lot of money has gone into buying United States debt because it's been the most secure place to be since the first Scorpio Taurus eclipse in 2022, right? But in a world where oil is up and food is up, people will have to sell some of the US debt to get dollars because they have other debts in dollars. We all do, right? So if the most important thing for you guys to understand is if the dollar is getting stronger, life is getting expensive, people are going to need more dollars. They're going to get dollars where they can. So that's going to affect markets, right? And that's going to be particularly bad for government debt because people will sell that to get more dollars, even if they want
How
American
do you
debt.
mean they sell the debt? I don't understand that.
So buying debt is what you call bonds or treasuries.
Oh,
That's,
okay, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
they can be kind of, so if I use the word treasuries, bonds, or government debt, I mean the same thing.
Who wants to
Okay.
buy American bonds now? I mean,
Exactly. Who wants to buy bonds in any government
yes.
when they're all at war with each other? Are they going to be here in the next 10 to 20 years? And that's often how they sell them, right? 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds, 30-year debt in investing in government. And what they do is when you buy those, that's the money they use to pay off their debts or their interest payments. So understand this now. If the world is selling off United States bonds, treasuries, debt, right? They're all the same thing. Then the price or the value of that treasury, the debt, it goes down. And if the value of that is going down, well, if they're using that money to pay for all their debts, then they have to raise the interest rate to raise the value back up because people are dumping it. So you see how circular the whole thing is. And America, as well as all these other countries, are facing kind of like I've heard some economists call it like a doom loop in many ways, right? Because you have people dumping, they're raising the rate is more expensive. Nobody can afford to borrow money because the rate is high. Everyone wants dollars. It can be a very difficult situation. And so that is a world where energy is unaffordable. Food is unaffordable. The cost of borrowing money is unaffordable. And because they keep telling everyone the economy is strong, everything is fine, that kind of scenario can catch a lot of people by surprise, right? So I'll ask you, again, I said this gets nuanced. Do you have more confidence in American businesses or the American government?
Yeah, businesses.
Yeah. So in that way, we see that the stock market, actually, like, I don't think it's going to go away. It's not going to implode. It's not going to self-destruct, right? I have more confidence in the businesses too, right? So I think everyone feels the same way. So the crash people are looking for, I don't think it's going to be in the stock market. Not yet, anyway. I actually did give my timelines on that during the last December marathon video that we did last time, right? That's going to be late at the end of the decade for the American stock market. But the crash people are anticipating, I think it's more likely to be with government debt throughout the world, okay? And here's why. China has been the biggest buyer of American debt. If you couldn't figure it out, guess what? Those days are over, baby. Why would you fund your enemy during a war, right? We're in World War III after all. And I'll keep saying this until it's obvious. I have to, but why would China give their enemy money during a war conflict, right? And that brings us back to Jupiter in the sixth house, the house of debts for the United States. America's spending more than ever. And maybe it's just me. I think you would agree. Like if your biggest client left, if my biggest client left, I wouldn't respond by spending more money than I've ever had in my entire life. But that's kind of what America's doing, right? So Russia's not buying US debt anymore. Why would they? Right? They just got kicked out of the American financial system. Saudi Arabia has stopped. Japan has a bunch of economic issues. They can't buy even if they wanted to. Even the United States Federal Reserve doesn't want to buy United States debt. They've committed to this thing called quantitative tightening, which they will do for as long as they can. and they're not looking to really buy things. They don't want to buy treasuries either. And so this is why I've told people, on these videos, in my consultations, in my newsletter, to buy these things called United States T-bills. They're a shorter duration instead of the bonds, right? Because that's debt the government will pay back in 1 to 3 months. And people have done quite well with that. That's still a good play right now. Truthfully, I can't tell anyone to buy government debt for a longer period of time, right? There's too much insecurity in government, and that trend will continue into the 2030s. So we're moving into a time now, specifically as we get into 2024, where there are these government bonds in the United States called TIPS. They stand for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. Those can be a play I'll discuss in consultations or other videos. But, for most people, this is where gold and Bitcoin and real estate come into play for the average person, right? So people often ask, Sama, what do I do? What do I do? I love your videos, but what do I do? How do you make this translatable for me, right? And this is where I point them depending on their charts, because these are places where you can store your money and have physical private control, right? If your chart likes metals, I point people towards gold and silver. If your chart likes if your chart is more Uranian, right, I point them towards crypto and that kind of a thing, right? You can look at your 5th house, 8th house, 2nd house, 11th house for those kinds of
By the
signs.
way,
And
anyone would like a reading with Sama, I'll put a link below to his financial astrological services, just to mention.
yeah, for sure. And so those places, ultimately what we need to understand or consider is, I've listed out, there's going to be chart correlates astrologically, but the thing that wraps all those solutions together is they put your money in your private physical control, right? They're not in public places like the banks or in government debt, okay? Those places, the public places, they're only going to become riskier throughout the decade. So you want to be in those places where your money's in more private control, like your house, or having gold bars in a safe, or having crypto in your control, depending on your chart, right?
What about the
So
stock market? You said the stock market is not gonna be a problem.
it's the stock market's not going anywhere. So this is nuanced, right? And I'm gonna break this down. The market itself, I believe, is going to go down a bit, but it's not going to disappear. It's not going to crash to hell or anything like that. And there will be some companies that do well. I'll give you guys some guidance on that as we move through this, because it's important to understand why some companies will be doing, or why some sectors will be doing well and why others will not. And that's why I'm breaking down this larger overview, so you guys can understand Sama's thinking and how the larger astrology is affecting finances, because ultimately what we do with our money is really the sum of what the human beings on the planet are up to. And what affects the actions of us as human beings are things like political or global conflicts and weather and food, these larger trends that are really governed by the larger outer planets. So just this year alone, for example, $1 trillion have left American banks, right? It's just in America. And we see how Jupiter, one of these larger planets, Uranus, one of these larger planets, in the sign of Taurus, is bringing all this disruption. So I would advise people, this is kind of a mental shift. Don't worry about the United States stock market specifically as much as you should be worrying about the currencies of your government. Because when governments fail, goodbye banks, goodbye pension, right? And those are bigger problems, right? So banks, for example, in the US, they hold most of the commercial real estate. This is an easy, obvious prediction. Many of you probably did this math in your own head. The big office buildings, the malls, right? Not in good shape, especially if the banks, which are not in good shape, hold those loans, right? Many of these structures, they can't survive this Aquarian, smaller tribe work from home energy. They just can't. That's the larger trend with Pluto and Aquarius, right? So we see how these larger planets, when they shift, it's like we move into a new era, and that's that, right? So this issue with treasuries and bonds and government debt, what does this lead to? This leads to a topic I've talked about several times. I talk about it in every video, this push for central bank digital currencies. Some countries will try this. And like I said last December, it's not going to play out as well as these so-called elites. I don't think that's an appropriate term for them, but it's a term people understand. It's not going to work out for them the way they think. Nigeria literally tried it this year. I heard that part of that was they were trying to, I shouldn't even say, there's something to do with a pipeline with Nigeria or something like that. But apparently they tried the central bank digital currency. It was a disaster. It failed. Right?
Oh, really? I thought they
Yeah.
just stopped cash so no one can pay in any other way.
That's what they did. And people rioted like crazy. And they had to say, okay, well, I guess the people just don't want this, or they're not going to accept this. And that is a prime example of people standing up and just saying no. That's an example of social rest increasing. And it's also an example of why they want to implement these things, or why the world is at war right now, is these governments, they're losing their grip, they're losing control. And that's just the nature of consciousness in life on a larger scale, isn't it? Right? We're born, we live, we die, and that's everything. And that's the same for governments. It's the same for every living thing. And we're watching them lose their power and grip and control really tightly as they lose that. So in order to maintain control, they don't want us leaving the system. They don't want me telling you to get gold and Bitcoin. They want you to stay put. They want you to keep calm and carry on. I don't know where that phrase comes from, but we hear it, and that's what they want us to do. You know, this Capricornian nature of government, it's so interesting with Pluto kind of dancing at 29 degrees. It's been a pain in the ass for me personally, but it's interesting to see how this plays out, right? Because on one hand, you have government that's going to sustain itself for the long term. You actually want that in a government because that provides us stability and security. But what we don't want are these corrupt governments that are clinging to power, right? By any means necessary. And then they call that national security, right? That's the shadow side of Capricorn we don't want to deal with. And we're kind of tired of dealing with that. But as these governments fall apart, that's what we're seeing. That's what we saw over the last 3 years. And we're going to see a little more of that as they continue to get weaker. So that's actually what's taking place. And of these so-called first world countries, I've said it before, it looks to me like the EU is going to be one of the first to really push these central bank digital currencies. And this is a repeat. We've looked at the charts before. I won't spend too much time on it, but it doesn't appear to me that the countries in the EU are all going to be on board with that, the way that these powers that be want to consolidate them. You know, we've tried the whole one world government thing. I keep referencing Rome because it's kind of like what we're seeing right now. They were always at war with their one world government. And these elites, they always want to just make it one big thing. And we're too diverse for that as people. And that's part of what's beautiful. I was just in Europe a couple of weeks ago. I like that it's different than America, right? But that's not how some people see things, you know? I've heard an economist that I've learned from once say that the euro was created to weaken Germany and keep France strong, for example. Right now, these are the types of internal things that, as they try to push central bank digital currencies, and really as the nodes work on Aries and Libra and these larger trends that we're talking about here, that force nations to say, well, what resources do we have? Should we be sharing this with everybody? Well, they didn't pay their debts, we paid ours. All these conflicts, all these conversations, that's what's going to be rising. These are the things that the EU and other allied partnerships are going to be arguing about. And the South Node in Libra, right? Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus is money. Libra, partnerships, allies, right? South Node, reduction, letting go, as we talked about. This tells us that at some level, financial partnerships are getting dissolved, right? Saturn, the planet of endings, like I talked about last time, it's in the EU's 8th house of sudden events, crises, energetic exchanges, marriage, financial unions. We're going to see Saturn, the planet that also governs time and can bring endings. That's going to be in the EU's 8th house, right? Saturn's going to be at 6 degrees in Pisces in an exact opposition to the asteroid Chiron. Chiron is a financial asteroid. It's one of the ones we look at in financial astrology. That's going to be at 6 degrees of Pisces in February of 2024. So as that opposition approaches towards the end of January, you have Pluto moving back into Aquarius. We're going to see difficulty, financial difficulty in Europe. And Aquarius, by the way, it's a cold sign, right? We're talking about January with oil prices going up. If you live in Europe and you had any heating issues last year or any energy issues last year, I'm sure you can tell by what I've said so far, you need to figure out how you're going to keep warm. Now, it's easier to do it now than to figure that out in January. So that's a good idea. Now, if you live in the US, you're going to be okay in terms of where we get our energy and how we deal with our energy. It's not going to be great, but we're going to be okay because we do have our own ways of getting oil within the continent. Europe is very spread, and their oil, Europe's not going to be okay. Europe has also stopped getting their energy from the places that they were getting it from before, aka Russia. And so they're buying it from other countries that are getting it from Russia at a premium, at a higher price, which it's a problem in itself. So energy, gas, heating, food, all these things are ruled by Taurus, being disrupted by Uranus. And these things will continue to be uncertain until the planet Uranus leaves Taurus in 2026. So when you do have energy, when you do have food, it's good to use those times to just save a little bit, because when Uranus brings random shakeups or disruptions, then you have a little bit, right? So just something to keep in mind between now and 2026. So let's move on to eclipses and the rest of the year, the rest of the quarter. So the situation, because of so much social unrest right now, the powers that be, they actually don't want a recession because, well, they're dealing with enough social unrest as it is. Maybe you've seen those crazy videos out of California where people are just looting and stealing things because everything under $900 is not a crime. Stuff like that, right? They don't want any more social unrest. So they actually don't want a recession. Okay. That's why they keep telling you soft landing or there won't be a recession. Don't worry about it. Right? They're actually trying to do that. And that's to avoid unrest. Like I talked about the last time I was on, the first time actually, I introduced a word that may be new to some of you, stagflation, right? What is that? That's no growth, a stagnant economy. It's basically sideways. And then you have inflation going up during that time as well. That is what we're dealing with this decade. That prediction still stands, and we'll continue to see an environment where countries aren't, and economies, they're not really like growing like we saw throughout the 2010s or like the late 90s, right? They're just kind of move sideways while inflation creeps up, right? So no growth, high inflation is the economy. That's in one sentence. That's the decade, right? We're living in a wartime environment now. So wartime portfolios make sense. You need to invest in Capricorn, old, slow, reliable businesses, manufacturing to be specific, and in the energy sector, Taurus, right? The world continues to be uncertain, so money will go where there is certainty, right? See, what the eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio have done, in my honest opinion, is they've broken the global economy. Globalization is no more. We're still experiencing some of it because it just happened, but it's over. And it used to be that the world economy revolved around the dollar, but ever since the war with Russia and Russia getting kicked out from the dollar, which happened weeks after the first eclipse in Taurus and Scorpio, nobody trusts anyone anymore with their money because the US took all of Russia's money. So trust has been destroyed in a very bad way. When President Nixon started all his money printing in the 70s, and he took the dollar off of the gold standard in the 70s, this is what people don't understand. The United States actually had high interest rates. The cost of borrowing money was high, right? And so what happened from the 70s until about the till about 2015, the interest rate just dropped while the US was doing all this money printing. right? So that was actually a beneficial trend to have the rate dropping while we were printing money, right? So the cost of borrowing money was falling. They printed more. They took that extra money and they paid their debts. Nice world to live in. Nice scenario, but that's over because now rates are increasing. And we're going to run into a situation where they have to print money. So that's going to be the exact opposite of the 70s. And since the current people in office have no idea about anything, many of them don't realize the party's over. They can't print like they did in the 70s. They can't. Some of them at the very top, like your Klaus Schwab, they know exactly what's going on. And that's why they want things like CBDCs. They know the game's over. But a lot of them in office, they have no idea. They don't know anything. And so they just spend. And that is ultimately what America's big problem is. We can't pay off our debt. None of these nations can. And the debt problem is usually a burden that gets put on the next generation. They kick the can down the road, but the demographics, they're horrible. Millennials and Gen Z, like we can't get off our screens. They can't even get out of their parents' houses to go on a date, let alone start a family and get these jobs and mortgages and spend like the boomers did, right? You even need to outspend the boomers. I don't see that happening. These generations, they're not making babies. Who's going to pay for all that boomer debt? It's not going to happen. So since World War II, these governments, they've been using the debt to pay off their expenses. It's done. It's done. And that's ultimately what we're dealing with. This is going to take some time to play out. But I just think it's important that you guys understand at the highest level where the game is at and how it's being played. It's over. It's broken. They're trying to keep control. They don't want you to know any of this. Okay. So in the short term, US debt is still better than any other country. That's why this information is nuanced. Listen to this several times if you need to. There are different timelines. I know that can be confusing, but in the long term, it's my belief as a financial astrologer, we will look back in history and see America kicking Russia out of the financial system as like, that was the end. That was like a big shot to the dollar, that the dollar kind of like a wound that the dollar never really quite recovered from. So those are the eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio. We have one left. What the eclipses in Aries and Libra are going to do, quite obviously, the partnerships and allies we see, and the borders too, right? Borders as well, those are going to break. Janet Yellen, I don't know if you know who she is, US Treasury. She says America has enough money to fight 2 wars right now. We don't. We have a money printer. And if they want to turn that back on, this is where we get back into financial predictions. It's in their best interest to let the market drop before they do that. But again, they don't want a recession, but they do want the market to drop. So will they be able to pull this off, right? How does this play into the last eclipse in Taurus and Scorpio? Well, as you guys might remember, we have the last eclipse in the series of Taurus and Scorpio eclipses. And the last one in November of 2022, we saw a crisis with a crypto company called FTX. We have a full moon on the 28th of October. This is going to, at a personal level, depending on where Taurus is in your chart, it's going to bring up all the Taurus energies and themes in our lives, right? And a full moon is also an opposition to the sun. This is going to be 5 degrees in Scorpio in the opposite house. And so full moons are going to bring both of those areas of Taurus and Scorpio to the forefront. And it's going to do the same on a larger level as well, asking us to balance these issues, right? So what kinds of issues will Taurus and Scorpio bring? Financial ones, right? Debts, joint investments, shared finances, personal earnings. Scorpio represents the money we share with others, like renting a property, banking, credit card bills, big financial institutions like banks, treasuries, bonds. That's more of the Taurus things with currency, because Taurus is about money we accumulate, possess, and how it supports your life. And treasuries is what supports the life of the US government, right? So we're going to see that being impacted on a larger scale. Personal scale, we're going to see this eclipse actually emphasize self-worth because we're wrapping up this Taurus eclipse cycle. Taurus is about values, personal values. So this is a time for us to be reflecting what's important to us, really. And how do we make what's important to us and our values stronger, actually? Taurus energy really is about stability, right? It's about self-reliance. And in many ways, this eclipse is going to show us how we've progressed in those areas, because it's an energy we've been dealing with since 2022. And we've all had to make adjustments, right? And so what the lunar eclipse will show us is areas that require further attention as well to wrap up the cycle, okay? So that's how earth signs are: practical matters, responsibility, planning, logical reasoning. Who do you owe money to, right? Treasuries, right? Now, despite what I've said about the US economy in the long term, and this, as you can probably predict, having a dampening effect on markets, although they won't break, in my opinion, on a personal level, this is actually a decent eclipse. It's pretty good for us on a Monday. I would say, because I like it because it's an eclipse where people can really break free from old cycles that they were unable to before. Taurus is really stubborn like that, and Scorpio likes to cling on to things. And what this eclipse can do is finally bring a release in some of the patterns that people have, depending on what houses these signs are in. Okay. And why I like it is we have Jupiter involved. Jupiter is in conjunction with this eclipse. It's at 11 degrees. It is retrograde. And it's actually going to go back to 5 degrees of Taurus by mid-December to visit this 5-degree point, which is interesting. So wherever you have Taurus in your personal chart, Jupiter is going to expand your intentions, bring the changes you want into that area. And Jupiter was actually going to spend some time at 5 degrees till, I think, mid-January. So we've got a couple of months of runway here where we can be supported. We can see new opportunities. We can gain resources. We can get invitations, different blessings and gifts that make the end of October through mid-December, even into mid-January, an important time for working on our goals. Right? I think that's more important to pay attention to than to worry about markets, And at 5 degrees Scorpio, I believe the sun is going to be there, and we're going to have Mercury and Mars conjunct as well. So we got a little bit of a stellium opposing Jupiter, and that's a bit of a strong team, Scorpio stellium right there, Mars and Scorpio, right? And then we have, in my opinion, when this takes place, I think this is when we're going to see more of those disruptions on the government debt side of things, which could affect banks and could bring a drop in markets, but again, I don't think it will crash them. Mm-hmm. Okay. So with the cost of life getting more expensive, I think it's inevitable that governments will have to dump United States debt to acquire dollars. So we'll see a dumping of US government treasuries, and America will have to deal with that. So on a personal level, though, this is where we deal with obligations, debts, shared responsibilities, just like America will have to, right? And in Scorpio, it's not just about, burdens or what we cling to, but it also has that hidden potential of abundance if we can master joint ownership. So some of you guys might have opportunities like that, whether it's going in on a mortgage together, a new business deal, a new opportunity. Let the eclipse guide you guys into partnerships that will really support your abundance if you have those opportunities, right? And this, on the other hand, too, this eclipse is really powerful with the Scorpio energy. It'll help us realize where our energy has been, let's say, too invested in others' concerns, and it will trigger some people to reclaim their energy back, right? So at a mundane level, this goes back to when we said how nations are going to say, why are we giving all our resources away to these other countries? Maybe we should keep some for ourselves. And at a personal level, some of you will have that same realization, right? It's a really good time to let go of what no longer serves you, because part of Scorpio's transformative journey is often about letting go of what's unnecessary to gain that personal power back. Now, with me, I like seeing Venus and Jupiter at play with this eclipse. The two benefic planets, they're both in earth signs, though. They're typically, particularly Jupiter, is stronger when it's not in an earth sign. So there is that. But what earth signs bring is practicality. So that tells us, even though there'll be some financial issues that the world has to deal with related to their debts, there's practical solutions that can be at play with these eclipses. So again, the market will not break into a million pieces. Actually, this is an odd prediction. You can tell that that what I'm saying is they will drop. And I believe that that's going to take place in November. But there's actually a possibility for markets to end the year slightly higher than where they're at now, which is essentially me saying the same thing. They're moving sideways, right? So Taurus energy, ruled by Venus. Been talking about the importance of Venus. Why I like it here, it's going to be at 18 degrees of Virgo, and it's leaving a trine that it was in with Jupiter. Trines are really blessed, triangular, benefic, angular, geometric arrangements between planets that bring a lot of ease and blessing. They actually have the flavor or vibration of Jupiter when we have trines. So that Jupiter retrograde is moving away from Venus, which gives us a little room for, less abundance, more issues, let's say. However, Venus is getting close to a breakthrough with a trine with Uranus at 21 degrees that I'm paying attention to. Uranus is interesting because it's disruptive, it's chaotic, it's technological, it's innovative, and it's interesting. And it can bring about disruptions and explosions as well on a mundane level, but this is a trine to Venus, the planet of money. Venus is also near the fixed star Spica, which is associated with resources and wealth. So I personally am going to be on the lookout for opportunities or companies or even news where there's innovation in food or money or new ways to deal with financial situations, especially if they're digital or involve AI at this time. I think this trine is going to offer a solution or a fix or some kind of healing energy. That's what Virgo likes to do. Venus is in Virgo. You might even see the release of a digital currency. But ignoring that possibility for a second, again, Venus is great for healing. And so on a personal level, which I think is important, yes, we'll talk about the larger financial stuff, but I like to bring eclipses down to us personally, because it's a great energy for us to be focusing on improvements in our lives, in the body, and support overall for our well-being, right? Use this Venus and Virgo energy to benefit your nervous system, because Uranus can affect the nervous system, right? Can bring chaos and fluctuation, and you might be hearing stuff about rising prices or inflation or market instability, and that might trigger some of you. But use that Venus and Virgo energy for healing and taking some time to reflect, what does my body need? What do I need to be supported? And also practically, what's my budget look like? I think a lot of you are doing that naturally anyway. So as we talk about digital currencies, that brings me to Bitcoin. From a technical only perspective, that's the stuff that other financial people look at if they're good. I can see Bitcoin falling under 20K one more time within the next 6 months, actually. Now, what makes that interesting? Well, let's zoom out. We're already hearing that some of the attacks on Israel were done using Bitcoin and crypto in the news. Interesting, right? They love to put out news like that. And we also know governments only want us to use their money. They want to keep us in their system. We also know from what I shared with you that their systems are falling apart. They want to push us to digital money that gives them more control. And so when I look at the financial astrology on the Bitcoin chart itself, I see a new wave of pressure from authorities and also a lot of interest. There's a lot of institutions that want to get their hands on Bitcoin because they know what I know, what we just talked about, that these governments are in trouble and they need to put their money in places that they have control over. So there's mixed energy, mixed interest in Bitcoin, where some want to attack it and some big names want to protect their money. So I see the stellium that's taking place in Scorpio with Mars, Mercury, and the Sun. That's actually going to be in Bitcoin's 4th house. The 4th house is known as the place of endings, for those that didn't know. This stellium, to me, looks like a concentrated focus on Bitcoin and the fact that, hey, this was used in a war, blah, blah, blah. We'll see a lot in the media about maybe even changing some rules or regulations around Bitcoin, but the news isn't going to be good. And I don't think it's going to be positive for price. And I think the retrograde in Capricorn is of Mercury retrograde, the December, the month after, that's actually going to be in Bitcoin in its natal chart in the 6th house for Bitcoin, right? So that's the house of debts and issues and enemies, right? Like, which we talked about with the US chart. So I think that retrograde is going to have people rethinking their Bitcoin positions for better or worse, right? And I think that there might be new ways of taxing or auditing crypto with AI or technology that might come out as well. But all this bad news, I can tell you, like I said, there are institutions interested in it. All that bad news is going to create an opportunity for them to buy while the rest of us are panicking. So, you know, Venus is also going to be in Scorpio, and that's going to be affecting Bitcoin's 4th house in December as well. Venus doesn't really like being there. And so, again, some changes or instability in crypto is likely. I think they're going to try to scare people away from it. I think that's most likely going to be this November, possibly even the end of this month, maybe even the week this video comes out. We'll start to hear more of that. You know, it's all within this eclipse umbrella, but what the big money like BlackRock will be doing is they'll be buying, and then we'll see Bitcoin above 30K next year in 2024. So those are my predictions for the 4th quarter. More stagflation, more sideways markets, trouble in banks and government, more war, more inflation. So just to wrap it up, how do we respond? Venus wants you to make sure your personal budget is in order. Make financial decisions that'll make you more money than the rate of inflation, like buying more commodities instead of just stock companies. And if you are interested in those, you want energy producing companies, right? Take your money out of public places like the banks, none of those 20-year, 30-year treasuries. Move them into private control. You know, some of the very wealthy are buying jewelry and art. If that's you, do that. If you're an average person, gold, silver, Bitcoin, real estate, right? And then with Aries in the North Node, bold new ideas, healthy risk taking, right? Especially when it comes to food, resources, personal safety, fight for your independence, get what you need, take care of yourself. And like we covered, where's Jupiter in your chart? If you focus there, you will be blessed and your opportunities will grow. So that is that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sama. Very practical, very easy to explain, even for someone to understand, for someone like me who doesn't know much about money. But very insightful. Again, if anyone would like to contact Sama, I'll put a link below for a financial astrology reading with Sama. And I'm looking forward to have you soon again on the 2024 Astrology Marathon to see where trends will be going.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. No sales or offers at this time. Very busy, focused on health as well. Pluto's been kicking my ass, but if you guys want to learn about that thing I call tips, right, and how I'm playing them, book a session. If it's not the right time, again, they're called Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. You can do your own research. The market's not going anywhere. It might take a hit. So if you still like the market, Capricorn and Taurus, energy producing manufacturing companies, it's an obvious sector, I can tell you guys with confidence, right? And what I'll do when I come back in December, I will come out with a report full of my stock picks, companies I'm looking at for the year of 2024. That's going to be literally 10 times more affordable than booking a session with me. So we're excited about that. But if you want to have a discussion about what I'm looking at ahead of time, you can grab some time in my calendar. I'll be back in December. So with that, one love, everybody. Peace to the Middle East. Peace to you and yours. Be well. Take care. Bye.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sama. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.